Good morning or good afternoon, as the case may be, wherever you are, and thank you for joining us for this CVMA Animal Health Week webinar. My name is Louis Qantas, and I'm the president of the CVMA, and it's my honor to be able to be a moderator for this webinar. I love Animal Health Week, and I know there's a lot of preparation that goes into selecting of all aspects of this week of celebration, from topic to posters to speakers, and so many thanks to the CVMA communications team for picking such a pertinent topic for this, the 36th CVMA Animal Health Week outreach. Animal health, human health, and planet health, One Health. There could hardly be a more germane topic given our current pandemic, and I'm looking forward to hearing from our esteemed colleagues from the University of Calgary Faculty of Veterinary Medicine on One Health. It's all about relationships. We're grateful for our sponsors today for making this webinar a possibility. Thank you to iFinance, PetCard, and PetSecure Pet Health Insurance. After both of our speakers give their presentations, there should be time to entertain questions from attendees. But at this point, I would like to invite Mr. Ross Dow of iFinance, followed by Mr. Ken Werner of PetSecure Pet Health Insurance, to introduce their respective speakers and presentations, which will follow directly after. Mr. Dow?
Thank you, Louis. Dr. Barkema has completed his DVM at Utrecht University, the Netherlands, in 1988. He spent 2.5 years as a large dairy and beef herd manager before teaching bovine herd health at Utrecht University and working as an epidemiologist for the Dutch Health Service while completing his PhD. In 2001, Dr. Barkema moved to UPEI before moving to UCalgary, founding the UCVM's Department of Production Animal Health. He is currently professor in epidemiology of infectious diseases at UCVM and NSERC Industrial Research in Dairy Cattle Infectious Diseases, with a joint appointment in the Department of Community Health Sciences at the Cummings School of Medicine. Dr. Barkema is also a guest professor at Ghent University in Belgium and foreign expert at the China Agricultural University in Beijing. Dr. Barkema is also, his research focuses on prevention and disease control in cattle herds, including AMR. He has published 300 plus scientific manuscripts. He has lectured across the globe. Dr. Barkema leads the UCalgary Biostatistics Center, the Canadian Bovine Mastitis Research Network's Environment Research Theme, the Alberta Johns Disease Initiative, the Antimicrobial Resistance One Health Consortium, and UCalgary's One Health Emerging Research Theme. So without further ado, I present Dr. Barkema.
Hello, everyone.
Thank you. It will be a joint presentation, so I think Michelle should be introduced right now, Ken, if that's okay with you.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for joining us during CVMA's Animal Health Week. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Anholt, who completed her DVM at WCVM in 1985 and spent the next 22 years in mostly companion animal practice in BC and Alberta. She joined UCVM as a grad student in 2008 and completed her PhD in epidemiology in 2013. For 6 years after, Dr. Anholt, a self-employed veterinary epidemiologist, serviced different organizations on varied projects, including SEVA Canada, an eye health survey and financial sustainability assessment of an eye care program, both in Madagascar, Department of Fisheries and Oceans, a new healthy salmon framework, Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative, a wildlife health intelligence platform for avian influenza, CFIA, a Mycobacterium bovis outbreak response team member, Alberta beef producers, beef production AMR studies, New Zealand, a Mycoplasma bovis outbreak response team member, and pharmaceutical companies and clinical trials. Dr. Anholt returned to University of Calgary in 2019 as manager of One Health, helping develop and advance the emerging research team. Everyone, please give a warm welcome to Dr. Anholt.
Thank you so much, Ken, and thank you to both the sponsors. I'll just share my screen. That's working okay? Yep. I need to make it move. There we are. So Herman and I are really excited to see One Health as the theme of Animal Health Week this year. It's obviously our passion, and we were glad to see that this important topic was addressed. So Herman and I are grateful to be able to work and live in Calgary, which is located on the traditional territories of the people of Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. The University of Calgary is located on land adjacent to where the Bow River meets the Elbow River, and that the traditional Blackfoot name of this place is Mohkinstsis, which we now call the city of Calgary. I am currently visiting beautiful Gatineau region of Quebec, and so I would also like to acknowledge the unceded territories of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. So this cultural protocol of the territorial acknowledgement and our first National Truth and Reconciliation Day last week is a practice for reconciliation with our First Peoples. And the territorial land acknowledgement is done so that settlers and descendants of settlers such as me acknowledge the importance of developing closer relationship with the land by recognizing the living history of this beautiful place. And we're also acknowledging the imperative of having respectful relationships with our Indigenous neighbors. Indigenous ways of knowing and being are founded on respect. And this painting by John Rombau, who's a Dene artist from Northwest Territories, this painting hangs in my house. And when I met John, when I was working in the Northwest Territories and bought this painting, he explained to me that the worldview of his people is that everyone and everything is connected by the same spirit that is within us all. And so we're all related. Humans are part of the ecosystem, not outside, and not managing or controlling it. So One Health is similar in that it takes a holistic and collaborative approach to understanding and mitigating health challenges with the goal of improving health of all ecosystems. The concepts embraced by One Health date back thousands of years to our Indigenous peoples, where they've held that the relations between people, non-human animals, and the environment is central to health and well-being since forever, since time immemorial. And these Indigenous worldviews precede and inform the origins of One Health. And I just wanted to acknowledge that this is not a Western, although it's a Western view of how we should tackle these complex problems, it has origins elsewhere. I just wanted to bring, because our topic is relationships, I just wanted to bring in the Oxford Dictionary term of it, which is really about how groups of people or concepts behave towards each other and is a state of being connected. So this figure is very similar to others you'll see on One Health and the internet everywhere. But this one we developed because we always want to remember that the animals, people, and the environment are interconnected, but they exist within a context of social, economic, and political context. And so that adds to the complexity of dealing with these problems. And so we need to rethink our relationships with animals, people, and the environment, but we're doing so with economic and political and social pressures. And so I'm not going to read those definitions, but it is really about finding a way to improve the health and well-being of people, animals, and the environment. And so we just have a few slides to remind us of why One Health is important if anyone needs any reminding. So we've had a terrible forest fire season in many places of Canada last summer, and a lot of it has to do with climate change, hotter, drier, longer summers. And climate change is a huge, complex problem, often called a wicked problem, in that there's lots we don't understand. There's competing interests trying to address climate change. And there's a large cost to the problem itself, but also to the solutions that might address the problem. The emergence of SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 is also an example of a complex problem that needs to be addressed from a One Health approach. So it's a problem with these wet markets in Asia and serving wild bats often live and dead wild animals mixing with live and dead domestic animals, and it's not clean. And we're just creating opportunities for the sharing of pathogens that should have stayed in the cave with the bat. But when we start to move into those wild spaces and not respect the boundaries of those wild spaces, we start to see challenges such as disease emergence. And COVID-19 is only one of many. There's many others that we could use as an example. Antimicrobial resistance is a classic One Health challenge. The antimicrobials used for people, animals, and the environment are the same as are the bacteria. And as we shed those antimicrobial bacteria or components of bacteria into our waterways, we're sharing those agents and perpetuating the problem. Antimicrobial resistance is very much a human-driven problem based on decisions of people that prescribe and use antimicrobials, but the consequences reach across all domains. But I think there's room for hope. If you Google, is it time to reassess our relationship with nature, you will find all sorts of hits. So people are starting to ask this question and wondering how we get started. This is a great video if you're interested in looking at it from the BBC. So you can Google that and take a look at that video. It's beautiful. But people are gardening. It was hard to get seeds. People are recognizing the importance of green space with our crowded parks and so on. They saw more wildlife and they heard more bird song, and they're starting to understand how important it is. So One Health is about collaborative transdisciplinary relationships. And so transdisciplinary, there's lots of different ways to address it, but I like Max Neef's approach, and this is from his paper, Foundations of Transdisciplinarity. And he describes the disciplines as levels of a pyramid, and the base of the pyramid asks what exists. So these are the specialized discipline that try to understand biology, math, physics, chemistry, ecology, economics, and so on. And this is the empirical reductionist science level of trying to understand natural phenomenon in terms of their underlying mechanisms. The second level is composed of the technical disciplines that explore the question, what are we capable of doing? So this is very pragmatic. This is where our practitioners are. So this is where we are, veterinarians, as well as engineers and architects and agrologists and so on. And this is the level that helps us heal, build, and grow. And it develops vaccines, it builds bridges, and produces food to feed billions. So this level clearly is of enormous benefit to mankind. But the question not always asked at this level that needs to be asked is whether we always should just because we can. And the third level aims to answer that question. And it's, what is it that we want to do? This is the normative level. And this is where we get to bring in the opinions of society, and where the researchers and practitioners from the bottom two levels will integrate to try to answer those questions. So they look to find the best way to answer a problem. And citizens can say whether this is okay or this is not okay through environmental impacts, policy debates, plebiscites, protests, lots of street protests and elections. At least in a democratic society, that's how it works. The top level contemplates the wider implication of the decisions that we've made. And it asks, how do we want to do what we want to do? And this is the value level, coordinating the scientists from the first two levels, the practitioners and decision makers at all levels. And so from here, we're trying to move from what we know to just being to greater wisdom, and how we can meet the needs of today's generation as well as future generations, which is very much an indigenous view, to make sure that you leave something for your future generations. And recognizing that whatever we do today, because nature is chaotic, whatever we do today can have unintended and unwelcome consequences, and we need to think about that. And also, are we addressing social injustice? And I think our response to COVID-19 has clearly shown that we have not, that we are often making decisions that do not address social injustice. And the final thing is, does it respect environmental limits and nature? And again, as the wet market in China shows, those kind of actions do not respect nature, and the consequences are emerging diseases. So I'm just going to use an example showing, just to describe those 4 levels. So if you live in an area of Canada that's endemic for Lyme disease, and this dog is presented to you with a loss of appetite, lethargic, stiff or lame, fever, swollen lymph nodes, Lyme disease will be a differential on your list. And when you've confirmed Lyme disease, you'll begin treatment and continuing to monitor this guy for years to come, as well as you will ensure that this client and all your clients are using effective tick prevention medication. So you're working very effectively in the bottom 2 levels. So and your focus here is disease. How are we going to manage the disease in this dog and prevent disease in your other dogs in your practice? And you're doing that relying on the work and the knowledge that's been gained from microbiologists and pharmacologists and parasitologists and so on. But ticks and Borrelia are increasing in number and in the number of cases and territory across Canada in the last 5 years. And it's due to warmer temperatures and the wider dispersion of ticks on their hosts like mice and deer and so on, as well as migratory birds. And so with the expansion of ticks, there's also been the expansion of cases of Lyme disease. So the more challenging question is not how you're going to treat that one dog, but how are we going to manage the disease in the population? How are we going to limit the increased incidence and spread of Lyme disease? So this beautiful city visiting is endemic for Lyme disease. This is Perth, Ontario. And so a systems approach would address some of the upstream factors that have led to the increase of Lyme disease in places like this. And so how is this the result of our relationship with nature? So we'll go to that. This is a study done, it was done in Belgium, but it's very similar. And it's showing that increased fragmentation of the environment. So we have one where we have decreasing woodland and decreasing sizes of the blocks, and this was done with modeling. So they have blocks of land varying from 1 by 1 to 10 by 10 in size, hectares in size. Some are next to non-vegetated areas like a city, and some are next to grasslands. And then they try to understand how that affects the incidence of infected ticks in that area. And so woodlands adjacent to non-vegetated areas had a higher level at the smaller blocks of infected ticks than those next to grasslands. And the smaller the block, the greater the proportion, the greater the number of infected ticks. So the grasslands seem to make quite a bit of difference based on these models, as well as the size of the block of land. So what does that mean? So to understand why that might be, we'll just take a quick look at the life cycle of the black-legged tick. So it starts with the hatching of the egg in the spring, and they do not generally hatch infected with the Borrelia bacteria. But when they start to look for their first blood meal, it depends where they live, how that works out. If they live in a place like Perth, Ontario, where the landscape has been fragmented by the development of the city with small areas, with small wooded areas, the species that is most likely to do really well in a place like that is the white-footed mouse. So this is a story of landscape fragmentation as well as loss of biodiversity. And the white-footed mouse is a very common tick host, and it's a very competent host in that it is can effectively transmit the Borrelia infection to another susceptible host or vector. So if it's infected with Borrelia and infected with it and bitten by a tick, it is quite competent in passing that infection on to that larval tick. And so if it was in a normal forest, an undamaged forest, then other mammals, the medium and larger size mammals like hares and deer, they're not competent to transmit the bacteria back to the tick. So because we have this look where there's all these small forested areas where the white-footed mouse is quite happy and thrives, there's lots to eat, there's very few predators. The transmission of Lyme disease is much greater than it would be in an undamaged forest. So how are we going? This is definitely a bigger problem. This is not going to be addressed with a bottle of doxycycline. This needs to be addressed with all levels of scientists and decision makers trying to figure out a way to reduce fragmentation of our environment where we build our cities and to improve biodiversity so that we can have better outcomes for nature and as well a better outcome for the citizens, including their dogs. So to address that problem of Lyme disease is going to take the collaboration and the relationship, good relationships with all of the disciplines as well as the decision makers. And then the focus becomes health and not disease, health and sustainability, so that we can improve the problem across Canada for all populations. So it's not easy. And if you're trying to think of how are we going to reduce fragmentation of our city, landscape fragmentation in our cities, that's not an easy question to answer. So I did a project early in my PhD trying to understand how we do successful collaborations. So we did a literature search looking at experiences and wisdom from collaborations of health partnerships, health research, knowledge transfer and exchange, business people, and systems design engineering, because they write a lot about how to do this, whereas One Health didn't really write about that. And so we were trying to identify the key attributes of successful interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary collaboration. And then we had a workshop with experts, 16 experts who had experience in transdisciplinary collaboration, and they were physicians, veterinarians, and biologists. They were from private practice, academia, and government. And they shared their perspectives on what worked and didn't work for collaboration from their experiences. And so our findings was that it's characteristic of the people and their shared goals and policies and practices. So first of all, they needed good information technology so that they could work together, because that could be a challenge, trying to share information. They needed to be able to know that what they were doing was better, that they were making a difference. And that can be difficult to measure for transdisciplinary collaborations because the problem is so complex. They needed to work in a place that would allow them to do it because it's slow, it's expensive, it's crossing jurisdictional divisions. There's often not very much money for it, and you have to share the credit. And so they needed to work in a place that would allow them to do it. It was really important that they loved the project, that it was something they were interested in, that they had a vision, that it would inspire passion and enthusiasm. That was absolutely essential. But the most important was the people itself. They needed to work with other people that were passionate and committed. They needed to have strong social networks and be open to expanding those networks. They needed to trust who they were working with, and had open lines of communication, preferably face-to-face communication, although they didn't have Zoom when we did this, so they don't know how Zoom can be. But anyway, face-to-face communication was better. And they need to be working with people that were good at what they do. So if you were working with a geneticist, they needed to be a really good geneticist to be able to contribute to the team. And it helped if they had experience in interdisciplinary projects so that they understood, so that everybody understood the challenges and were open to making it work, even though it could be very difficult to do. And they had all completed projects that were also very complex, maybe not at the same level as trying to slow the spread of Lyme disease, but it showed that there was absolutely a chance. And Herman has some examples later on, showing how it can be done, and it can be done very, very well. So at the last G7 in June, they did have a communique that said improving integration by strengthening a One Health approach across all aspects of pandemic prevention, preparedness, correcting the critical links between human and animal health and the environment. So it is gaining momentum, and it's being recognized as an important approach by both governments and universities. So now what? And it all starts with education. That's what One Health at UCalgary believes that. And so our education is at all levels. We do public forums to introduce just the general community to the concept. And we have courses that we offer to university students. But we also, when we had our town halls in the fall, when we first got started, we asked our community, how do we train the next generation of One Health researchers and practitioners? And they all said, you need to start early. And so, meaning start with kids. So in January, January 2021, we had a meeting with the Werklund School of Education, and we invited public school teachers and curriculum developers to discuss this. And one of the ideas that was really came out of it is that when today's children have grown, they're going to be faced with very complex challenges, such as climate change and antimicrobial resistance and emerging infectious diseases, as we've discussed. And that'll impair the promise of their sustainable future and for their children. So this generation really needs to see the big picture and the challenges within, understand their role and take them on. And so the goal of taking One Health to the classroom was to teach children how linking the disciplines and respecting nature and social justice can lead to better health and wellness of people, animals, and the planet. So these were the findings from that session. Is they needed real world problems. I was hoping we could just give them worksheets and put them on our website. They didn't make it that easy for me. This is actually a lot more work, but it's really fun project with them. You need to use real world problems, experiential learning so the kids can experience it themselves, use their hands, build respectful relationships. That was very strong with experts from outside the classroom to create a sense of community. Inquiry-based learning takes time, so it needs to be integrated throughout much of the school year. The teachers wanted professional development so they could understand the problems. They wanted to, so they could be part of the teaching as well. And they also wanted to make sure kids could see the breadth of their career choices, because if, you know, there's so many options out there, it's hard even to begin to understand them. So we are developing a pilot with the Calgary Girls Charter School, a very enthusiastic group. They chose the theme, Why Water is Worth Protecting. And we're in the process of co-developing the curriculum with the teachers for the winter semester. So there's a lot of work to do, but it will have a very strong Indigenous component, so that link to understanding how important our relationship to the land is never lost, and that they continue to appreciate that. And Herman, this is where you take over.
Thank you, Michelle. So it doesn't end with high school. What we also do not do sufficiently is align our curricula, the veterinarian and the medical curricula. Even at the University of Calgary, where we're co-located, there is hardly any contact between the medical students and the veterinary students. And it's all relationships, and working together is built on trust. You need to get to know each other. So we could start teaching subjects like epidemiology, communication, which we do a lot in Calgary and also at the other vet schools, but also do project-based learning. One thing is doing outbreak investigations together, because it happens often that when we do an outbreak investigation, that it is a zoonotic pathogen and that we need to work with the human doctors on this. And we should not only have a collaboration at the university with DVM students and MDs, but also social work, law, all kind of people that you really need when you have an outbreak like COVID-19. COVID-19 is an example where there should be way more collaboration. If you get an outbreak in a slaughterhouse, and we have seen those, the medical doctors should not act there on their own. They don't know that environment. We do. And also because there are people from all kinds of backgrounds that even don't speak English. And we need social workers, we need all kinds of other people to work together, and then you really solve a problem like that. Next one, Michelle. Michelle, yeah, thank you. So I'll give an example of this working together. It's also in practice. So here I was called, like I'm called often for problems in dairy herds by our colleagues in the province, and this was a problem with lots of mastitis in a dairy herd. So it was 1/3 of the cows had abnormal milk. Next one, Michelle. So, but then when asking, and that shows the importance of doing a good anamnesis, so there were more problems. There were also a lot of abortions, mid to late term, but there were no other apparent signs in the cows. So we started thinking, the practitioner and I, because we always do this together, and so what is going on here? And very high in our differential diagnosis came leptospirosis. Michelle? So we did serology to test for antibodies, lots of cows positive, and then we sent samples to the animal health lab in Guelph, because they were the best on doing this, and it was quite clear that this was leptospirosis. So then you don't only think of the cattle, but you also think of, there's a farmer and there are workers, and they really need to be careful, particularly during milking. When you get a kind of a spray, if a cow pees in the milking parlor, you get a spray, an aerosol, and then you can get infections through the eyes. So we warned the producer about that. Then 4 days later, the producer became ill. And he went to the doctor, to the MD, and told the MD about this. Yeah, but no, the doctor, the GP said, no, we're in COVID times. It's way more likely that you have COVID. Yeah, so let's focus on that. And he didn't know about leptospirosis at all. And also, when the veterinary practitioner called him, was not convinced that this could be leptospirosis. And then the farmer became sicker and sicker and sicker and had to be transported to the hospital in Edmonton. And then finally, after the practitioner really urgently called with the infectious disease specialist in Edmonton, they considered leptospirosis. So all this could have been better if there would have been better contact between the veterinarian and the GP beforehand, when they developed a relationship of trust. And when the MD also thinks to ask are you a farmer? Yes. So do you have any problems in your herd? And then contacts also the veterinarian and works on it together, because we see this very often, these kind of problems where we have zoonosis. You all have dealt with that. Next one, please. So we've all seen the consequences of poor coordination between disciplines and the sectors. We knew about diseases like COVID and we have coronaviruses and yeah, you sometimes then wonder, why do these other people, those MDs, don't think of these things? Next one, Michelle. And so we knew that aerosols probably would play a role and would be very important of that, and try to convince people of that. And it took a while before they got there. So it is, you know, we really need to work together in these kind of outbreaks, and it all starts with trust and working together. Next one, Michelle. So it's also the case with transdisciplinary research. I'm a prof in VetMed, but also in human medicine. So I work together with these two groups, and I am fortunate to lead One Health at UCalgary. So we work with people in all kind of areas together. And then it really shows that if you have complex problems that we work on, like antimicrobial resistance, by working together, you can really produce knowledge that matters. Yeah? So we then don't only focus on this bacterium. Yeah, we really focus on also on the sociology behind it, human behavior. Why do doctors prescribe antimicrobials to humans often? Why do veterinarians do it more often? And that's just only one part of this problem. So we try to develop knowledge and practices that promote what is perceived to be common good. And we have the stakeholders, all stakeholders involved from the start. We just got a contract to develop the antimicrobial program in Alberta, funded by Alberta Health and Alberta Agriculture and Forestry. And we are working with the practitioners in all kinds of areas. So not only veterinarians, we also work with the pharmacists, with the MDs, but also with the commodities, with the livestock organizations on this, and also with the water organizations. So, because if you involve them from the get-go, it also becomes better research and going to a better solution, but they also internalize it and become better advocates of what you do. So this is the kind of research that also can be done in veterinary practice. Next one, Michelle. So a study that I'm very proud of is that we did on retained placenta in Frisian mares while I was still in the Netherlands. I'm a Frisian from the north of the Netherlands, and these horses are just gorgeous and dear to me. And also the Frisian horses are kept by dairy farmers typically in Friesland. So when Mello Sevinga, a practitioner in Akrum in Friesland, came to me with the high incidence of retained placenta that he saw and wanted to do research on it, we sat together and thought about this. Next one, Michelle. So we brought a whole group of people together. Jan-Willem Hesselink, he was a horse disease specialist. We got a prof in repro, a reproductive biologist, quantitative geneticist, Ab Groen, an immunologist, a specialist in animal genomics. And then we talked and interviewed the horse owners also. And Mello had 200 owners of Frisian horses in his practice, so enormous number of horses. He had about 500 Frisian horses in his practice. Next one, please. So we defined the objectives of this project. First, is the incidence that a lot higher than in other horses? What are the consequences in Frisian horses? Treatment was often not very successful. So how could we improve the treatment? And if it's higher, why? What are the risk factors? What causes it? And then how can you maybe in the long term prevent it? Next one. So we defined retained placenta as retaining the placenta for more than 3 hours. And we collected data. And if I say we, it's typically somebody else if I say we that did all the work. So that was Mello in this case. And so and the horse owners, and they all wrote that down, and the incidence was more than 50% in Frisian horses. However, the consequences were not as severe as in other horses. There was no metritis, no septicemia, no laminitis. And when we looked at the reproduction, and that period, of course, in horses is, they often are, need to get pregnant in the first month after the foaling. We didn't see any reproductive problems actually thereafter, after the placenta was removed, of course. Next one. So we looked at the treatment and we did a clinical trial there, and we noticed that if you just take a calcium magnesium solution and you put oxytocin in it, then actually the response to treatment improved a lot. So it helped with the expulsion of the placenta. Next one, Michelle. So then we moved to risk factors. So we had 455 mares with complete data of these nearly 200 owners, and we also asked the practices around us to work with each other, and saw that young and very old mares had a lower incidence. It was significant, but not really that important. And there was no association with gestational length, sex of the foal, month of breeding, and time of the day of foaling. So risk factors that we sometimes see in cattle with retained placenta. Next one, please. So, but if the previous foaling resulted in a retained placenta, 82% of the following foalings also had retained placenta. So was there a mare effect? Yeah. And then we looked at the sires, at the stallions, and we saw that the percentage of retained placenta ranged from 29 to 72%. So was there also a sire effect, a stallion effect? Next one. So just some background on those Frisian horses. So they were, it's not for nothing that they are mainly kept by dairy farmers. They were used for labor as before the agricultural mechanization, early 1900s. And when the agricultural mechanization came, they were of no use for labor on the farms anymore. And so there were only 3 stallions registered in 1917. Of course, there were more than those 3, but only 3 stallions registered. And then the late 1960s, only 1,000 horses, Frisian horses, were there, were 500 matings registered. At the moment of the research that we did, there were 30,000 Frisian horses. And there probably would be more. I see that Klaas Wiersma is on the call. He's an owner of Frisian horses. He would know what numbers that are there. And with the popularity all over the horse of these beautiful, all over the world with these beautiful horses, it's likely even more. Next one, Michelle. So our hypothesis that we had after this study, and this is how I love to work. You work in practice epidemiologically, and then you generate hypotheses, and then you're going to test that with basic science research, and then you look whether with these basic science answers actually hold true in practice, and you do that all together. Yeah, and so relationships are very important in that. So inbreeding, genetic drift, decreased heterozygosity, and then inbreeding depression, leading to a high incidence of retained placenta. Next one. So we looked at inbreeding and we had data, and that's the nice thing of this of the Friesian horses. There were data from 1879 to 2000 when we did this study. So we had data of more than 50,000 horses and with a lot of stallions. But only a few of those, more than 500, were used as sires. But the mean offspring per sire was 92, quite high. So the inbreeding coefficient increased substantially in about 1920, after the agricultural mechanization, and it became higher and higher. Next one. So the current situation then in about 2000 was that of only 10 of the 52 sires used had more than, they amounted for 50% of the matings. And the mean inbreeding coefficient was 0.157. So that is higher than the level of a half sibling mating. Very, very high. So then there was a positive linear association of retained placenta with the inbreeding coefficient of the foal. So what was immunologically behind that? Next one. So we looked at the nuclear difference of the major histocompatibility complex, and we saw that actually when the foal and the mare were very similar in that important part of the immunological cascade, that the placenta was actually not recognized as a foreign body. Yeah, so if there was no difference at all, you had nearly 70% of the mares that retained the placenta. And then that rapidly decreased with the more genetic difference in the major histocompatibility complex thereafter. Next one, please. So the odds ratio was 13 times higher when there was no difference, and 8 times with only one nucleotide difference. So the proportion of retained placenta that we could attribute to being alike, so less than 2, so 0 or 1 nucleotide difference was 91%. So we could explain a huge number of the variation in retained placentas in them occurring. Next one. So the high incidence of retained placenta in Friesian horses then was a breed-related disorder in which inbreeding did play an important role. And the rate of inbreeding, we concluded then, together with the horse owners and also with their organization, that should be reduced. These retained placenta didn't result in a lot of problems, but there were other disorders that we saw that were also occurred more in the Friesian horses. And we really need to think about these magnificent animals and to have this breed to maintain it. And so thereafter, the breed organization took measures to decrease inbreeding in the Friesian horses. Next one, please. So the conclusion was that yes, we could indeed, if it occurred, help a bit more with treatment. It didn't result in a lot of problems, and that the major histocompatibility complex really played a role in that. And this point I want to emphasize, this exciting problem could only be done because of transdisciplinary collaboration and strong involvement of horse owners and their organizations. It is, I've done research with quite a number of veterinary practitioners, and it is exciting They come with important questions. They involve the owners, feed the results back, and really go deep into exciting problems. And it actually makes them a better practitioner by doing these kind of things. And it also strengthens the relationship with the clients quite a bit. And we have the opportunity at the University of Calgary, but also at other schools to really work with practitioners on these kind of problems. So it's all about relationships and about trust. That was a word, if you had a diagram of Michel, that tree kind of diagram, if you look at the people part, trust is an important word there. So this is just only one part that I wanted to emphasize in the relationships. We see so often in our society right now that there is a lack of trust, and people don't talk to each other. We only have to look at politics. Why are Democrat and Republican leaders in the US not getting along? Yeah, they don't go to birthdays together anymore and don't talk with each other. Just one simple thing. So relationships are built on trust and meeting each other. And I also would like to emphasize that it's important that you meet the medical colleagues and the other colleagues in your area and talk to them and build a relationship, so that we don't have the cases like we saw with the leptospirosis in that dairy farmer, and the guy is still incapacitated now because he was not treated early enough. Next one, Michel. So I just put this picture because I just love Frisian horses. So so relationships is everything, that we do. It is so important. So room for questions.
Yes, thank you very much to both of you. And I would like it, please, if someone does have a question, just to raise their virtual hand so I can recognize you, and then you can unmute yourself, just to be able to keep some decorum here. And if either of you, Michel or Herman, see a hand that I don't, then please go ahead and recognize them. So does anyone have questions for either of our presenters? While people are formulating their questions, I just want to say I do appreciate your comments, Dr. Barkum, about the trust and working together as important components in collaboration. And I think that demands then that from any of ourselves too, not only that we be trustworthy, but that we be willing to trust, which sometimes takes us a bit of a risk. And also that we have humility and respect in our interactions with our other colleagues. That's something that we always ask for and we are wise to give. Anyway, does anyone have, sorry, go ahead.
Louis, that's one of the reasons why I love working with veterinary practitioners with these problems when they occur, and always get them involved. And it actually, it increases the likelihood that we're solving these problems, and they have the relationships with the clients, and it's very, very stimulating.
Right, thank you. And Jim Fairleys, I see you have your hand. Would you please go ahead and unmute yourself and ask?
Sure. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Great talk, folks. Herman, this is for you. I've been involved, as a practitioner, and now in my current position at the lab and talking about One Health. And it's how do we engage the medical profession? I know we need to, but I've had instances where it's kind of fallen flat, and I'm not sure how to rally them on the medical side, I guess. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that and a lot of experiences that are not always positive. So, and it is a slower process, and it's all on meeting each other and building that trust. Me being at the medical school, and talking with my human medicine colleagues over the water cooler, being at meetings, they find out that, you know, we veterinarians actually know something, yeah, and are actually good partners in research. And sometimes we veterinarians are shy to do that, because some of us have a bit of a Mickey Mouse complex, and think that we are think them ourselves that we are less than medical doctors, while we are not. We actually, you know, they work on a different species, and that species is in higher regard maybe, but that doesn't make them a better doctor. So working with them after building the trust, you know, it's great. In One Health at UCalgary, we have a lot of involvement of our medical colleagues, and when we work on antimicrobial resistance, we see them struggling also. Oh yeah, every now and then you run into somebody who looks down on veterinarians, and then I sometimes ask them, so there must have been a time when you wanted to become a veterinarian or not? And then they often say, yeah. I said, were your marks not high enough? Yeah. But that's only necessary with a few of them. Yeah? And so, because they're humans as well. And gosh, they struggle in these COVID-19 times. If I talk with my colleagues at the ICU, and what is happening there, gosh, they are really afraid. Yeah, but you know, when we had an outbreak at Cargill, I called a meeting with the public health officers here, and medical doctors, medical infectious disease, and colleagues that are cattle specialists, like Eugene Jensen was on the call, and Gordon Atkins, and we had a very productive meeting there. But it was very difficult to persuade them to really get us involved there, because you really need to have built trust before that. Yeah? But it comes from ourselves also, and the willingness to contact them. And they typically love it when you give examples of things that we do in animals. Yeah? And we are educated in outbreak investigation in populations. Medical doctors are not. They are educated in the individual treatment. And they talk about precision medicine, and then talk about only targeted to one person, while we think of populations also. And so we are very valuable, and our knowledge is very valuable to work with them. And, you know, I see it with our colleagues also, the ones that love to communicate, the medical doctors, they love it. The easiest ones are the epidemiologists, because epidemiologists are people persons to start with. So you build that rapport, that trust. It's not an easy process, but COVID-19 has, and also antimicrobial resistance really has increased that quite a bit. I hope that's a bit of an answer, Jim.
Yeah, thanks very much. I sit down at some national meetings with the medical profession, and you have to start from scratch to tell them what food animal veterinarians do sometimes.
Yeah, and it's true, but you know what just happened is our colleague Jay Cross is just elected as the president of the Canadian, the president-elect of the Canadian Academy of Health Sciences. Yeah, so that is the body of human, animal, dental health people that work on all these complex issues. And I'm fortunate enough to be also a fellow of it. And so they elected Jay for this, and you know, so we have a veterinarian, yeah, as the president. Well, that's a big thing. That would have never happened a couple of decades ago, and it's also because of people like Jay who are really well respected, of course. Yeah, but I think we're making inroads there. But we really need to, yeah, be humble and go to them and talk, and then, you know, they will see the value, and they better.
Yeah, Dr. Barkma, you mentioned earlier about how most of us on this call that are, practicing have had our experiences with this type of information. Reminds me of a case a few years ago with one of my clients who had a son that had gone through a large number of tests to figure out what was wrong, including skin biopsies, which had shown eosinophilia. And they were going to treat him for autoimmune disease. And the client was telling me this as I was examining her dog that had more fleas than I've ever seen before on a dog. And in actual fact, in that particular case, the physician wasn't open to hearing my call, but the owner was happy to bring the information back. And I think that made a big difference in that case. So yeah, one by one, as you say.
Yeah, and then maybe thereafter the physician would be open to talking to you. And if you would be together at the Rotary or whatever event and get to know each other, then, you know, those things would, yeah, would happen. And you know, it would be good for having meetings together in a village, in a city, and presenting each other cases. And it is, you know, if I see our pathologists coming together and showing each other things, it's great. If our anesthesiologist presents how they put down a grizzly to the human anesthesiologist, they love it. Yeah, and that's the start of relationships, of trust, and yeah, working together.
Right, thank you. Does anyone else have a question for Dr. Anholt or Dr. Barkma? And see, I have a chat here. Some have been asked to talk to producers about COVID and vaccinating. What is the liability? I don't see the rest. Can you unmute and ask your question? I think it was Roy.
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Please go ahead. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, no, I've run across this, and I think this really ties in beautifully to One Health, but the whole COVID situation, and just it was specifically, and I've got quite a passion about this. A whole bunch of the Hutterite colonies are not vaccinated, and finally, it's taken a bunch of them dying, quite frankly, to see the light. And I've been asked to, you know, they said, I don't know if they'll listen to the medical profession, but I think they might listen to veterinarians that are dealing with their farms and prescribing various vaccinations for their production animals. So that was my only kind of hesitant, as you get up there and say, well, who are you an expert? You're a veterinarian. What do you know about COVID-19? You know, that sort of thing. I just kind of wondered how the group might handle that.
So I can give an answer to that, because I've been in that situation a couple of times. And if you say you are a veterinarian, what do you know about that? You actually often do know more about it than our human colleagues, because you understand populations, you understand outbreaks, and you understand farmers and rural areas. And so I had one morning, I had a meeting over Zoom, of course, with infectious disease specialists all over Canada. Some of them worked in the ICU, and they voiced how afraid they were of bringing the disease home and actually infecting their parents with it, and that they lived in fear all the time. So they talked about that, and it made quite an impression. An hour later, I was invited to give a talk to a group of beef farmers. And it was just after the rodeo that was organized here in Alberta, where they actually didn't look at all at and were, you know, COVID and have no prevention at all. And then the chair asked me, so Herman, what is your opinion about that? And I just heard somebody say that, and so this was not my my words, but I repeated it. I said, guys, I think what these people need is an injection with empathy and a vaccination against stupidity. Yeah. Now then the chair said, now Herman, say what you really mean. Yeah. And I said, no, I'll tell you. And I told him about this, what happened there. And how bad it is, the situation that we have. Because if we really look in our ICUs in Calgary and Edmonton, they're filled with people from rural areas where the vaccination rate is a lot lower than in the urban areas. And we as veterinarians can play an enormous role there because we know we are from rural areas. We work with the people there, and we are trusted by the people there. And Roy, we know about COVID-19. You know a lot more about COVID-19 than a lot of the GPs, the human GPs, and understand the transmission. It's just another species. Yeah. So and the farmers and people in rural area will listen to you. So it's so important that you do that. And I don't think we're liable. We are academics. We understand this. Yeah, and we need to play our part in this.
Great, thanks for that encouragement, Herman. Are there any other questions from any attendees? Okay, seeing none, I would just like to thank you, Dr. Barkma and Dr. Anholt. I finance PetCard and PetSecure Pet Health Insurance, and thank you to all of attendees for being here today. I wish each of you success as you promote good health in animals and in animal owners and in our ecosystem. Thanks so much and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the invite. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.